Arthur Russell Janklow. Arthur's Arthur, Russell's Russell, last name Janklow, Janklow.
Is that German by chance?
Well, my grandfather was from Hungary, so,
Ah,
and he was also Jewish, Hungarian Jew. They moved over here was Janklow Vitz, and they dropped the VITZ.
the bits, okay. So do I have permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Okay. When and where were you born, Russell?
I was born in Vermilion, October 23rd, 1963. So I'll be 60 this year. Starting to feel my age.
Well,
Doesn't seem that old to me anymore.
that's what happened. Can you tell us a little bit about your family's history in South Dakota?
Yeah. So my grandmother, Llewellyn Nace, she's from this area up, by Flandreau. And her family was originally from, southwest Minnesota. And then my mom was born on a farm 2 miles north of Flandreau, literally born on the farm, which
Wow.
in this day and age seems crazy. Yeah.
Did
Instead of a,
Luella have a big family?
yeah, my grandma had a bunch of brothers and sisters. So I think, 8 or 9, big Norwegian family.
Okay. Okay,
And my mom came from a family of 4, two sisters and a brother.
cool. And your dad's side?
Oh,
Really?
my dad's dad. They just there was 3 in that part of the family.
Now, I think.
So we weren't all that close with that part of the family. My grandfather was a Jew, and when a Jew marries a Gentile, back in those days, he kind of got kicked out of the family for doing that. So even though my grandfather was 45 when he passed away, and my dad was a young teenager, we didn't really have that much contact with my dad's side of the family. My dad's aunt, her name was Helen Seltzer, but we had a lot of contact with her. I think she snuck over here to Flandreau all the time to be with the relatives,
That's cool.
and then her kids.
Do I remember that your granddad was in the Nuremberg trials?
He was. So he was a pharmacist and a lawyer, which is unheard of. And he was actually also a colonel in the army, and he was over in Germany when he passed away, and he was a prosecutor in the civil side, not the criminal side of the Nuremberg trials, and actually died of a heart attack in Germany while he was in the military at age 45.
Oh, dear.
Left my grandma with 6 kids, the oldest one being 12. My dad was 11.
Lost his dad when he was 11.
Well,
Wow. Wow. Oh, that's tough. So, did he already live in the United States then, or he lived in Germany then, or Hungary
oh no, they all came over from Hungary before that.
before that?
Yeah.
So he went back.
He was from
over there
Chicago.
to be in the trials.
Right.
Cool.
Yep. He lived in Chicago. My grandma was a nurse, and she was working in Chicago, and that they met at the pharmacy.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's cute. So tell us a little bit about your career path.
My career path, well, I grew up in Pierre. We moved to Pierre when I was a 3rd grader, so I started 4th grade in Pierre back in 1972. Prior to that, lived on the Rosebud Indian Reservation. So I finished high school in Pierre in 1981. My parents were, strong and still are pushing on education. So I went to Creighton University from 81 to 85 and got a degree in finance. I took a year off between undergrad and law school to work in the governor's office, and I knew my dad was going to run for the U.S. Senate, so I got to work on the campaign. Then went to law school from 86 to 89 at Notre Dame, came back to South Dakota, was a law clerk in southeast South Dakota for a year, which was an unbelievable experience. Then I got a job at Woods Fuller from 1990 to 95, which was also a wonderful experience. Great mentors, fabulous lawyers. I left that firm in 95, joined the firm that I'm currently with now, and I was with this firm for 13 years, from 1995 to 2008. Then I left this firm to go practice law with my dad. And so he and I formed a firm, and I was with this firm until my dad passed away, and then I kept my own firm open until 2015, and then I rejoined the current firm I'm in right now, back to my old firm.
So you've had a variety of experiences with that.
Variety of experiences, yep.
So were you too young to remember much about Rosebud, or do you remember living there?
No, I remember living there because I went through the third grade there. Yeah, all of my experiences and remembrances are all positive, for sure.
When your dad first ran for Attorney General, he had a little bit of a rocky campaign.
Yeah, he did. So when we moved to Pierre in '72, he and Judge Surska, Bill Surska, had a law practice together for a couple of years in Pierre, and that's when they had the American Indian Movement riot at the Custer Courthouse, where they burnt down, started the courthouse on fire and had a big a riot over a case. And basically at that time we had a Democrat governor, Knipe, we had a Democrat Attorney General, Kermit Sandy, and I think they approached my dad and said, hey, you need to be the prosecutor for this riot because you've been their lawyer for several years. They respect you. No one's going to claim that this is a racially motivated prosecution. And as my dad used to say, I went from being one side of the table to them all of a sudden saying I was the biggest racist of all time, which just wasn't true.
Yeah. And he had
So that was a rocky road because you had allegations that came up. Yeah.
Allegations. So Kermit hired him, and then Kermit came back with the allegations, or was that not Kermit?
It wasn't Kermit. It was basically the American Indian Movement. They brought a woman forward, Jancita Eagle Deer, and it's all been documented and as untrue.
So was your dad running? Your dad was running at that time.
Yep, running for.
Was that hard on him?
Yeah, I think that was really hard on him. We don't have near the social media and the access to information that you have today. So back in those days, you got most of your news from 2 or 3 news channels, 1 or 2 newspapers, and that's it. And you didn't have an opportunity to write the story nor the headline. So, the public's access to information was a lot more limited than it is today.
I don't remember that Kermit denied it, though. Or did he?
No, I don't remember him pushing it. I guess I don't remember that he was, that was in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. What made your dad want to get into public service?
I think once he, I guess I don't know that he ever really actually wanted to do that. So originally when he got out of law school, he went through the 3-3 program, 3 years undergrad, 3 years law school, graduated in 1966 from law school, and originally had gotten into New York University to go get an LLM, which is a master's degree in tax law, but couldn't start till December. So he moved out to Rosebud for a job for 6 months, and as he says, I moved to Rosebud for 6 months and I ended up staying for 6.5 years.
He liked it?
Yeah, I think he really liked it.
He liked helping people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think he really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. So,
And got a ton of experience, trying all sorts of cases and, he get thrown in. He was head of the legal aid services for South Dakota. So, I think it was a big job at a young age. To even think of how young he was when he was Attorney General and Governor is even still kind of mind-blowing to me.
he was.
Youngest governor in state's history at 39.
So how did it get resolved with the American Indian Movement then going forward in his career?
And the history would all show this, but even in the elections he'd have, we have 9 Indian reservations. He would carry 5 or 6 of these Indian reservations. And so I think the older generation of most of these tribes, I don't think believed, any of it. And so I think as time went on and as that dissipated, I think it got better and better. But we've always had, it's a complicated issue, the reservation and, reservation issues and sovereignty, and it's just a constant struggle. And regardless of who the governor is or who the senator is, it's a constant struggle, not just in our state, but all the states around us.
Do you think he enjoyed being Attorney General?
Yeah, I think he loved it, being the chief law enforcement official in the state. So he went from being a big defense lawyer to all of a sudden being the chief prosecutor. Back in those days, the Attorney General's office was way more involved in big prosecutions. Most of the state's attorney's offices in these counties didn't have the resources or the people to prosecute big cases, so a big murder case was almost always prosecuted by the AG's office. That's not the case today. You take Minnehaha County and Lincoln County, there's some of the top prosecutors in the state working in the county offices right now with unbelievable experience. They don't need the attorney general to come to town to help them. They could ask for the help, but they don't need it. So back in those days, those main trial lawyers that worked in the attorney general's office, those people all came out to be the top trial lawyers in the state. Jim McMahon, Tom Welk, Brant Wilbur. I mean, we're talking about some of the best lawyers, trial lawyers in South Dakota.
So he had a good crew and he enjoyed it, you think?
I think he really enjoyed it. Plus, I think he was very good at just letting these people go. Hey, here's the file. Go try this case. Go figure it out. Which I think at the time those people were probably scared at the time, but it was also a good experience for them.
So what were some peak moments of his AG time?
I would say some of the main, we had several main murder cases in our state that he was involved in prosecuting. So I think those were probably, and back in those days, drugs, the war on drugs was a lot, I think it's been a failed policy. We probably talk about that all day, but back in those days, that was a big deal. And so chasing drugs and drug dealers was was a lot of priority for that. And so I think he was pretty hard on that and, spent a lot of time in that area.
So what do you remember about growing up in Pierre?
Well, Pierre, for most people that have either never lived there or been there much, Pierre is a wonderful and fabulous place to grow up. Even my friends here in Sioux Falls who maybe have been to Pierre but never really spent any time there, I don't think they have any idea how great the river is, how nice the river is, how big it is. The hunting and fishing is unreal. Pierre's in the Central Flyway. So November, December, you'll have 250,000 ducks and geese flying around and literally flying around the town. It's insane. Pierre was just it's looking back on it, just seemed like life was really simple. That just, it's pretty hard to get in too much trouble doing anything.
Even if you're the governor's kid?
Even if you're the governor's kid. I was just telling a story about this the other day. A person who I have an immense amount of respect for was our high school principal, Roger Lombachen. I just think he was a fabulous man. He treated everybody the same. He didn't care if your dad was a plumber, the chief of police, the Lutheran pastor, or the governor's kid. He treated everyone the same. And we really didn't have what I would consider a class society in Pierre. There was no country club. Everyone did the same thing. You hunted and you fished and you played softball and sports and the water skiing. If you were a kid that came from a family that didn't have a boat, how many times can you water ski before you're tired yourself? So if you had the boat, you could maybe ski twice or 3 times. But anyone who wanted to be pulled, no one asked you, what did your parents do for a living? No one cared. If you wanted to ski, people pulled you.
What was the nickname your dad had on the river?
Well, he claimed he was the best fat man water skier in South Dakota. He was pretty good. I will give him that. He was a good water skier, but he spent a lot of time at it.
And how old was he then?
So, when he was governor the first time, he was 39. So, 39 to 46 the first time around in Pierre. And yeah, he was, in good shape and strong. And he used to tell me it was the rule of 10,000 hours. The more hours you put into something, regardless of what you're doing, you should start to be good at it. And he spent a lot of time water skiing. But we had easy access. Back then, you could just go down and put your boat in behind the hospital. It'd take you 10 minutes to put your boat in the water, and you could be skiing 5 minutes after that.
So what kind of guidance and advice was he giving you during those years?
Well, once I introduced my dad as an ex-Marine and got my ass chewed for that. He said, hey, once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. But when you grow up in the household, when your dad's a Marine, it's, get up in the morning and there's always a list of stuff to do, for sure. So
Did he carry that into the way he conducted his political offices too?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and you knew this from your days in Pierre. My dad had an unbelievable work ethic. I mean, no one outworked him. He was up late all the time. He had he wanted, if there was an issue he was working on, he wanted to know all the information he could get on it, whether it's reading it or interviewing someone or making a phone call somewhere to ask someone a question. Because if he was going to be interviewed by somebody like you back in the day, he wanted to have his facts straight and knew what he was talking about. And he was a smart guy. He was a quick reader, and I think that served him well, and putting in the work. There's no substitute, for putting in the hours and the time.
I seem to remember an early interview with an Argus Leader reporter when your dad, I guess, invited the guy to your house. Do you remember that?
Dave Kranz, or
I think it was Tim Schreiner, the bunny suit.
Yeah, no, I don't remember that specifically, but he had a love-hate relationship with the press. So the Bob Mercers, you, Dave Kranz, you people were the conduit between him and the public getting the information. And back then we just had Kello and KSFY. You didn't have 400 channels, and you didn't have any of this. Couldn't just get interviewed and have your own channel or whatever. So there was obviously, he wanted to get his version out, and you guys did a good job of, asking him tough questions, and I think he actually appreciated that, to be honest with you.
Because he didn't feel he had his own direct channel.
Yeah, right. And, he wanted to get his version of the facts out to the public, but at the same time, I think he might have complained now and then about, oh, that's a tough question, but at the same time, I think he always respected the job that people had to do.
So he was very protective about his family.
He was. I think his attitude was he was the politician, he's the public servant, he's the person that's, ran for the job, and that, his family shouldn't have to deal with or put up with all the scrutiny, which would even be 10 times more today than it ever was back then. So if you thought there was scrutiny then, I can't imagine what it would be like today, to be honest with you.
Right. So how did you kids and your mom, how did you handle his growing public image?
In Pierre, it was pretty easy because, we were already in school with kids before my dad became Attorney General. And so, and then when he became governor, we literally moved from 119, 214 South Washington to 119 North Washington. We literally moved 2 blocks away. Same neighborhood, same friends, same people. So I think in Pierre, I never really felt like it was that big of a deal, because all these people are people you grew up with and knew. And like I said before, there wasn't any of this big class society. So growing up in Pierre, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But yeah, anytime you left, went to any other town or were involved in any kind of social setting, yeah, there were times it was easy and at times there wasn't.
Do you feel like the media also kind of stepped back a little bit from covering the family because they knew he didn't like it?
I think so. Yeah, that's my guess. I never really felt like that there was any news story about our family that I look back on that I was upset about. That wasn't fair game. Yeah, I think the local press people, I wouldn't say gave us a break, but I think didn't try to make us any kind of a news story compared to, there was plenty to write about with him, I think.
So were you following all that political stuff as a kid? Or?
Yeah, I did. I was the oldest and the only boy, so I think it was pretty natural, not that my dad didn't care about taking my sisters, but, one of my sisters was a 5th grader when I was a senior, so I think if you have your choice to take your senior high school son and get in the car and drive to Rapid and back, I think he probably chose to do that over taking a 5th grade girl and his friends. Usually he had staff in the car and whatever, so yeah, I was super lucky looking back on it.
But back in those days, he didn't have security.
Didn't have security. I think being a Marine, I don't think my dad ever had any fear of that kind of stuff. He just didn't. All the way till the time he passed away. I don't think he
drove himself?
Drove himself. There were, a lot of times he would have people with him that would drive. He would drive there and maybe have them drive back. But, a lot of times he would be doing the driving. And it's pretty easy when you're in Pierre. Pierre's in central South Dakota, so Rapid's 150 miles, and Aberdeen's 150 miles, and Sioux Falls is 235. Mitchell's 150. It doesn't take that long to get to some of these places.
And it was a priority for him to get out in the state?
Yeah, I think that becomes part of the political animal. It's kind of either in your blood or it's not in your blood. And when it's in your blood, I don't think you look at it as a job. I think you thrive and enjoy driving and going and speaking and shaking hands. And I remember a time when my dad was in office, I came out to the house here in Sioux Falls, and I was hooking up the boat on Memorial Day weekend to go down to Yankton to ski. And he was getting in the car to drive he was going to Tyndall first to speak at some Memorial Day service. And then that night he was going to be in Weston Springs, and he asked if I wanted to go. It's 85 degrees out. I'm thinking, the last place I want to be is in a car going to Tyndall and Weston Springs on Memorial Day weekend. You can have fun. Well, he drove down the driveway with a big smile on his face. I mean, he really enjoyed doing it.
You remember the little fluffer doodle that we had about the red lights? Were you with your dad when he used his red light?
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it at that time in our state's history, I don't think that was as big of a deal as it probably turned out to be or it is. But the public had a huge appetite for him to be at functions, and he's being asked all the time to be at this stuff, and he wasn't really good at saying no. Well, if you have to be in Mitchell at a certain time and then in Yankton at a certain time, and you're driving, a lot of times you get to a function and you think you're supposed to leave at 3, but people are still talking to you, and you don't want to be rude and walk off on them. Well, that I'm not saying that created the situation, but it didn't help it.
Now, did he also fly?
He flew, so he was a big pilot. He didn't have an instrument rating, but he was VFR rated, and we had a plane from the time we lived in Rosebud. He had a single-engine Mooney 1968 Executive, and then he upgraded to a twin-engine modified Piper Geronimo, and I think he had about 4,000 hours flying, which is a lot. Most pilots would tell you that's a ton of flying. He loved flying.
And he used to fly himself on events, right?
Yep, he used to fly himself on events. And then as he started having some health issues, became a medical diabetic by having a spot on his pancreas, and they took part of his pancreas off, which made him a medical diabetic. Became some issues on you being able to fly by yourself and that type of thing, so he had a pilot that he hired to fly with him.
One of the things I remember about him was his big ideas. Can we talk about some of the things that he brought up or initiated, some that made it and some that didn't make it?
Yeah, well...
For instance, I remember the Etsy pipeline.
Yeah, so you're right. I think he was an idea guy. I think he thought that it was the responsibility of a person who had his job is to not just sit back and watch government, just muddle along. I think he felt an obligation to try to make people's lives better, make the state better, try to make the economy better. And he was a smart guy. He had an accounting degree from college, and he understood numbers, understood finance. And I think he pushed his people hard to come up with ideas and programs. And I remember all the time he'd be driving down the highway and he'd see a sign or something, and that would trigger something, and then he'd be on the phone talking to the DOT, and next thing you know, they were moving forward with some project or new intersection.
Can you tell us what the Etsy pipeline was?
Yeah, the Etsy pipeline was, in our state, you got all sorts of issues regarding, including fossil fuels and stuff that's going to, coming down from Canada, but you also have water issues. And, with the Missouri River, we've got a vast resource to be able to use, and you got all sorts of issues that flow from that. And we're going to see that more and more as we come down the pipeline here on whether we're going to have electric cars or fossil fuels and where we're going to be getting it from.
So that was one that didn't work out, but tell us about the railroad.
Yeah, the railroad, same thing. You had when some of these industries are starting to have issues, but they were important for our state to be able to move grain or to move products, the state got in the business of buying the railroad. And same thing with the state cement plant. When that became a big issue, the state got in the business, which is kind of unheard of that the state would get involved in private enterprise. Since then, the state has sold the cement plant. We just didn't have the need for it like we did back then. There's more suppliers and more companies that can supply it, but back at that time it was an important issue. We weren't able to get cement.
So who did he work on some of these plans?
So I think it was multifactorial. He, had smart people working for him, and he also had lots of friends that, were in private industry and lawyers that he could call and bounce stuff off of. So, depending on what the issue was. I look back at, for example, Jim Myers when he ran transportation. I think my dad had an immense amount of respect for Jim and thought he was a super sharp guy. Jim worked very hard. Anything that had anything to do with roads or railroads, Jim Myers was the guy. Depending on what the issue was. You take telecommunications, Mark Tobias was a very close friend of the family's, but he was he's basically an electronics genius. So anything regarding upgrading state radio communications or wiring the schools or upgrading anything to do with telecommunications or computers, he would rely on smart people like that to help him with these projects, like wiring the schools. In his second term, that turned out to be genius. These schools having access, especially when you have as many school districts that we have, that these schools are not that very far from each other. All the local taxpayers are not going to pay to keep these schools open that are 9 miles apart. They don't have the money to do it. So when you close one, well, if you have access to be, now everyone's got Zoom and those types of things, but this is, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, our state was on the front edge of that stuff.
Was one of his bigger, long-lasting projects Citibank?
Yes, Citibank probably is the one that people, it's probably had the most financial impact by changing the usury rate ceiling, having Citibank come out here in the early 80s. Interest rates, most people don't realize how high they were. And there was a cap at 18%, I think in the state of Maryland or Delaware or wherever they were. And prime interest rates were at 21, so they're losing 3% by just having people charge on the credit card. Well, our state, you could round up the legislature and you could get something done with a special session in a hurry, whereas most of these other states, you study stuff, can't get it done, you got opposing groups coming in, everything has to be studied, and they can't get anything done. We eliminated our usury rate ceiling, and Citibank was here overnight. And it's been phenomenal, I think, for this community and in eastern South Dakota for sure.
I remember that being a really emotional time in some ways because people were putting a lot of trust in your dad that he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially the legislators. You have some of these people that come in from these rural communities that don't have either the financial acumen or understand big business. They might understand farming and local farm prices and how to run farms, but they took a gamble, and I think some of these people. So as things became successful, I think he had more and more credibility with them. But people got along a lot better back then. There wasn't the polarization. You might not have agreed with someone on issues, whether you're Republican or Democrat, but I even talked about this at my dad's funeral in his eulogy. I think he was becoming horrified at how polarized politics has become, that that people don't get together to at least even talk about the issues. And I remember all sorts of meetings where my dad's inviting the Democrat leadership to come over to the governor's mansion for lunch or dinner and sit for 2-3 hours talking about this stuff. That doesn't mean they're ultimately going to vote for it. But, like he used to tell me, he's like, hey, Republicans aren't the only ones that have ideas. Democrats have ideas too. And sometimes their ideas are better than ours. So I just want the best idea. I don't care who came up with it.
So who were some of the people that he worked with in the legislature?
Well, in the first term, you had the Joe Barnetts. He was kind of very instrumental in the Walter Dale Millers. These leaders. Kurt Jones is a longtime Democrat from Britain who was a very close friend of the family's, and I think my dad certainly relied on him regarding all sorts of issues. He was just a very conservative, sharp, reasonable person and of course the lobbyists. And I don't know much about how lobbying's going these days, but Jeremiah Murphy and Bill Doherty, those two men in our state is super lucky to have them. They're just very smart, caring, reasonable, always trying to find solutions. So I spent a lot of time, I think, talking with folks like that. But you have I remember the Jim Bergs and the Lars Herseth. Those people came over all the time for meetings. I was just telling somebody a story the other day. One of the first, my recollections of how politics work was we had a meeting over at the governor's mansion for lunch, and I was in between undergrad and law school, so this had to be about 1985, or the spring of '86. And we were talking about an issue, and Lars Herseth was telling my dad, well, this is a great idea for South Dakota, and, blah, blah, blah. Well, 2 hours later, Lars is now on the Capitol steps basically talking against it on TV, and I just went bananas. I remember going into my dad's office telling, saying, I cannot believe, he's a rotten, and my dad's like, son, just relax. Lars is fine. Lars's word is good. Lars comes from a part of the state that this isn't popular. We don't need Lars's vote to get this done. He's got a constituency to answer to. He said, but here's what I'll tell you about Lars. If the vote was close and we needed Lars's vote to get this done for South Dakota, he'd figure out a way to vote for it. I was like, whoa. I had a whole new perspective on how politics worked and what was involved in politics. And I'm like, can't believe that this guy's over here shaking your hand, telling you it's a great idea, and then 2 hours later he's on the Capitol steps talking down on it. So
a lot of that went on.
Yeah, a lot of that went on, but I think these people had a lot more respect for each other as people than politicians do today. I think the far left has driven, the Democrat Party way too far left, and the far right of the Republican Party has driven, people, the center people out of the party. These people aren't even communicating about issues these days, or trying to solve the problem.
Your dad had kind of a reputation among the media as he could be pretty hard on people. Do you think that was true or not true?
I think he was hard on people, no different. He was hard on me growing up. I think he was hard on people to try to get the best out of them. I don't think it was anything, trying to be demeaning or humiliate them or embarrass them. I think it was the other way around. I think for him it was a motivation tool to get the best out of somebody. That's how I always looked at it, including the press. When he'd argue with the press, a lot of times I remember he'd say, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't have your facts straight. Get your facts straight. Well, I think that was a cue to the questioner, hey, go do some more research, and when you know what you're talking about, then you can start asking me questions about you don't know what you're talking about.
I think about that now. Of course, we were all a lot younger, but doing research was different back then because you couldn't just Google it.
True.
So I have respect for the amount of work it took for him to pull out some of those things together.
Yeah.
From a wide number of sources.
Yeah, so we didn't have computers and all that back in the early 80s. Well, everything was on a memo. So he'd be sitting up reading memos from Secretary of Commerce or, so-and-so. And then, of course, he'd pick up the phone and call people at 10, 11 night. I'm sure he called you late at night. So for him, there was no 8 to 5. It was, if he was awake, it was working.
That's really true. I remember the lights coming out from Joe Barnett's office all night, too.
Yeah, I think that generation, this younger generation, I don't think has any idea what work ethic is and what it takes, to get from A to Z, in part because I suppose modern technology can get them the answer faster so they don't have to work as hard to get it. But, yeah, that older generation, they worked hard.
So if your dad was still with us, what do you think, what would he be thinking now about politics and about South Dakota?
That's a very good question. The one thing I think he probably would, I think if you're a boy, you go to the boys' bathroom, and if you're a girl, you go to the girls' bathroom. I think that would be pretty straightforward for him and his generation. But, I think these social issues, I think they've become very complicated. And, what people are being taught in the schools and what they're not being taught, I think that kind of stuff would be driving him absolutely crazy.
How would he feel about the social studies standards? Have you read them?
I really haven't read them and paid that much attention. I don't have kids that age anymore, so I haven't spent as much time.
First grader memorized the preamble to the Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, I just saw this morning before I got here, some teacher was being reprimanded for teaching constitutional rights to third graders, and I'm thinking, how can a teacher be reprimanded for something like that? That just seems so out there to me. Glad I'm not the president of a school board today. It'd be a lot of work. Who would want to be the president of the school board today?
Your dad had quite a relationship with Native Americans. Can you give us some insight into how that went, like how tied in he was?
Yeah, so most of these people that end up becoming chairmen of these tribes, he are people that he either knew or had relationships with along the way. I think he did even though it might not have been all in the press, I think he did a good job of talking with these folks and trying to meet with them. He understood reservation issues and reservation needs. I think there was probably nobody that understood it more than he did, to be honest with you. He's argued a couple cases, in one case, the United States Supreme Court over it. So he was a true expert on Indian law and Indian jurisdiction. And, I think that really helped him try to either get compacts going with the tribes or understanding the law enforcement issues. I remember one Christmas at my grandma's in Flandreau where there had been basically it was a blizzard on Pine Ridge, and they had run out of propane. And I remember my dad being on the phone talking to a propane distributor who was, one, worried about going to the reservation, but number two, who's going to pay for it? And my dad's like, deliver the propane. Between the feds of the state, we'll figure out to get you paid. Our checks will be good. Just deliver the propane. So, he was just a problem solver.
He was a problem solver, and a lot of people got those calls from him.
Yeah, they did. There was an accident, I think, where there was no stop sign. I remember this up by Aberdeen, and my dad, every letter he got, he read. The staff would type it up for him so he could read the typed version, and it was attached to the letter. He literally read every letter that was sent to him. And it was a lady up by Aberdeen, some rural road where there had been this accident and someone had gotten killed. And she had written in it, said, hey, this intersection needs a stop sign. And I remember sitting in his office, and he called over the DOT and got through to some engineer who's in charge of putting up stop signs. And I remember this engineer saying, well, Governor, we're going to need to do an engineering study on that. And he goes, we just had it. Put the sign up. So the sign, I think, went up the next day. He just was able to cut through that kind of stuff and make those kinds of decisions and get stuff done.
Would you say your dad was the CEO of South Dakota?
Yeah, I think almost any governor really would be if they want to be. But, if you looked at his polling numbers over the years, it would be, he always ran with a favorable in the high 60s, mid-60s. Well, he used to tell me, son, when we walk down the street, 2/3 of the people love me and 1/3 don't like me. And I always thought that was kind of funny. But at the same time, we called them verbatims in politics. If you ask someone, why do you like someone or why don't you? The same exact answer as to why someone liked him was exactly the answer of why they didn't. So the people that did, he got stuff done. He's a decision maker, blah, blah, blah. Well, the people that didn't like him, he's a bully and he rams stuff down our throat. Well, you have to get stuff done. He used to make comments, we're not going to study that. We've debated this. The soup is done. We're going to eat the soup. And if we need to add more ingredients to it, we can do that, but the soup is done. We're not debating this any longer. We're moving forward. And a project like that, a classic example, was the closing of Springfield. That was a very emotional, especially for that part of the state. Most of those folks had been so used to having a school in Springfield as opposed to now they're having a prison. And that was a high emotional situation, but in his mind, it was the best thing. We had 7 or 8 universities. The state couldn't afford to keep them all open. So that was one I think was, in his mind could be absorbed other places, teaching teachers and whatever. So, but that was a tough deal, but, in his mind, hey, we're not going to debate. This isn't going to be debated for 10 years before we make this decision. We're going to have a couple town hall meetings. I remember he drove down to Springfield and literally stood at a microphone in a packed gymnasium, which he didn't mind doing that. I think he probably almost relished answering the questions and hitting the stuff like that head on. Loved it.
Yeah, he probably did relish it. And he started the computer and technical program at Dakota State.
He did, yep. The same thing. Dakota State teacher school or whatever, there was no way that could stay open. And but of course, Jerry Prostrollo was a very close friend of my dad's, and Jerry was, that school was a pet of his. So we were going to have to figure out to do something with Madison. It wasn't just going to close. Mm-hmm. So, and it turned out with partnership with Citibank, all the technology stuff, and even look at where it's at today. I just read the other day they're going to start between Sanford donating some money and others, a new cybersecurity program that's going to be one of the top in the Midwestern country, right here in Madison, South Dakota.
Yeah, interesting how that all played out. Because that could have been a short-term thing. When your dad left, it could have been over.
Could have been over, but I think people could see that it was working. I can't remember who the first administrator. I think it was a person from Citibank, last name Luke, who went up there. But I think they could see that it was working and the transition was working, and he had enough of a track record of other things being a success that I think people were willing to give him a little bit of a pass to see if it would work.
So you're watching all this stuff as a kid. Did you always want to be a lawyer?
Not really. My first job in Pierre, I worked for the King's Inn, worked in the kitchen and helped set up banquet rooms. So I've always been real interested in, the restaurant, hotel type business. In fact, applied to a couple MBA programs that specialized in that. But I think deep down inside, I always knew my dad, even though he didn't push me to do it, I think he probably wanted me to go to law school. And if you have an opportunity to go, and you have an opportunity to go to a school like Notre Dame, you'd almost be crazy not to go.
How'd you get to Notre Dame?
Well, I was a baptized Lutheran, but I got a lot of Catholic education between Creighton and Notre Dame. How I ended up at Creighton was, I originally was going to go to school at Arizona State, and my dad had gone to a conference down in Phoenix in June after I'd graduated, but before I went to school, and he came back to Pierre and said, "Son, there are more bicycles on ASU's campus than there are people in Pierre. Maybe we should find someplace a little closer to go to school." And Mark Tobias had gone to law school at Creighton, so we went to visit. And when you grew up in Pierre, Omaha's a big city. And
so was that a good decision?
Yeah, it was a great decision. Creighton's a great school. It's close enough to home. A lot of my friends went to Vermilion, so it's 135 miles from Omaha to Vermilion. So I did come up to Vermilion a lot on the weekends. In fact, I came up probably enough that people thought I went to school at USD. But one of my best friends in undergrad, he had gotten into Notre Dame's law school and was pushing me to apply. And I applied and got in. And I got a one-year deferment. So once I got in, I didn't go in 85. He went in 85, but I took a year off to work for my dad. Work for the governor's office.
So you haven't run for any office?
I haven't run. When you grow up going to all these, having an opportunity to go to all these banquets, whether it's Lincoln Day dinners, Chamber of Commerce dinners, I just feel like, after being 4 years of AG and 16 years of governor, it's 20 years of public life of attending all this stuff and going to all this stuff. I just didn't think I needed to be in the middle of all that, to be honest with you.
You had enough.
Had enough. I don't mind some tangential involvement. I've been involved in some friends' campaigns and helped them with some campaigns, but it's a whether you're a Republican politician or a Democrat politician, I don't think the public has any idea, or most of the public doesn't realize how much work it goes into and how much work these people put into it and what a sacrifice it is for them. For some of these people, it's a huge financial sacrifice. They could go make a lot more money in the private sector. Marty's a perfect example. Marty Janklow, he made more money practicing law. He's one of the top lawyers in the state, and yet he's got a burning desire to be in public life. Well, we're probably lucky to have people that are willing to do that.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about your dad that, for posterity, for history?
I think his word was he gave a damn. He cared about South Dakota. He'd get into these national issues where he's either fighting with Minnesota or, the trying to keep Canadian pork coming through the state. He was very protective of South Dakota, and he was willing to, I think from a national standpoint, he loved that part of fighting and arguing for South Dakota. But, I think most people, they probably knew how smart he was, but I don't think most people, the general public, had no idea how hard these people work. It becomes their life. But if you enjoy what you do, it's probably really not work to them. So getting out of bed in the morning and going over to the Capitol and sitting in these meetings with people, I don't think he really thought it was work.
Did he do anything for fun besides water skiing?
Yeah.
Snowmobiling?
Yeah, snowmobiling, flying, you put a lot of hours in flying. We spent a lot of time on the river. We had we were one of the first people that had a houseboat and pier. This is before they had all the marinas. We spent a lot of time on the river with the, friends of the family, and, that was a blast. Pier is just an unbelievable place, especially above the dam from 4th of July on. The water's warm enough to be in it. You love the Chicago Bears, especially the last 20 years. We've had season tickets for 35 years. When you grow up in Chicago with no money, if you ever make any, he loved his Chicago Bears. He literally would go to every game. He went to every game.
And I remember him attending some of them in a circling airplane.
Yeah. Well, so that would be, you had, back when he first had a plane, CBS, you could get the Chicago Bears in Sioux City, but you couldn't get them in Pierre. So he'd fly from Pierre to Sioux City and check into the hotel, watch the Bears game, and then fly back to Pierre. It's crazy. It's crazy how the world works.
Catherine, how are we doing?
Good. We have a whole hour.
Okay. So is there anything that we haven't covered that you think we should go over?
Well, I'm just curious how what your mother's role was in politics and her relationship with your dad through all of this political journey.
Well, so, my mom's a pretty private person, and I think, she certainly didn't relish wanting to be in the front lines of any of this. I think she grew into that job, especially for the second term, felt more comfortable at social events. But yeah, to begin with, for sure, when my dad was AG, she had no participation or role in any of that. And in fact, we probably spent time, you had death threats, and there were times we were staying overnight at DCI agent's house, which is, when you think back about how crazy things were back then. But
was that related to?
Yeah, exactly. But once, so when we first moved up to the governor's mansion, I was a 9th grader. We really there was no cook at the mansion. There was really no, so my mom and my sisters helped, make the meals. And pretty soon you had Dottie Howe that came over to help, and she was a fabulous cook. And that's just morphed into, the social events that go on at the governor's mansion now are crazy compared to what they used to be. More staff. Now they have the women's prison in Pierre. I think my dad was very instrumental in having the women come over from the prison that were willing to work. We had all sorts of people working at the mansion who were in prison. That's all changed. But, my mom, I think, really grew into the job over time. But I don't think she's ever really wanted to be in the spotlight, never has really wanted, been in the spotlight much, and didn't relish it at all. I don't think she minded so much that my dad was involved. But I think I talked about this in my dad's eulogy as well. Politicians really got two families. You got your immediate family, but then you're also married to the public. The public has your time. You're married to them and their issues and beholden to their schedules and attend. There's a lot of stuff that you almost feel like you almost have no choice but to go to when you're the governor. It's almost required.
And I know your dad was protective of your mom and your sisters.
Yeah, very protective. Yeah, I would say so. For sure.
So do you remember as a kid, were you ever afraid?
I was never really afraid. I guess I call them the cowboys. I always got along. I was kind of a person that got along with everybody. And so whether they were a good athlete in Pierre or the Cowboys in Pierre, I wouldn't say I was untouchable, but I think those people went out of their way to make sure I didn't get hassled. So if we were doing something, and if someone came to town from outside of Pierre, I think that most of the Pierre local people, went out of their way to make sure that I wasn't getting hassled. So no, I never really felt,
And was there any security at the mansion?
So the initial security was the city police. So we had a system set up where there was buttons by the doors that could be pushed that they could hear us talk if we needed to, and also it was almost like I suppose a red light that went on down at the city police department. So the Pierre City Police were kind of the And the governor's actual, and it's still to this day, is the South Dakota Highway Patrol. They actually work kind of like under the governor. So, but my dad, having been the attorney general, he had friends that were DCI agents, and so, we didn't really. And then as things morphed over time, the Capitol security became bigger and bigger, and would patrol. But we didn't really have any. There was, Pierre's a small town. Neighbors are looking out for neighbors, and there was. I wouldn't say we had much for what I would consider any hassles. Yeah, anything major anyway.
Tell us about the house itself.
So the old governor's mansion was 6 bedrooms, and basically 6 bedrooms upstairs. So all the bedrooms are upstairs. Of course, that was great for the Knight family because they had a bunch of kids. But
they remodeled the garage.
they did remodel the garage. So, but the layout was. I'm sure the current mansion is super nice, and they've done a real nice job, and it's set up more for entertaining and accommodating social functions. But back then it was more of just a house. You had a dining room that was kind of like the state dining room that only was used when people came over for dinner, and you had a little state living room that was not even used that often, but would be used for when people would come over. But beyond all that, it was all residential.
Did your mom have helpers at the house?
Yeah, we had a full-time person. Luz was her name, and she did a wonderful job. So she almost kind of grow up raising us, and so you almost need the help when you're entertaining and having people come in and out. You need someone helping to clean and with the meals. There's no way to get around it. But it's also why both of my sisters are phenomenal cooks, because, and I think they both look back on it that they were happy that, at the time they probably were complaining, oh, I can't believe I have to help make this salad for 15 people. But both of them today are fabulous cooks. Probably because
they were enough younger than you. How do you think the experience was different for them?
I think, my sister Pam was 2 years younger than I am, even though she was 3 grades behind. I was in the Head Start program in Rosebud, so I was the youngest kid in my high school class. There was one other kid that graduated with me. I didn't turn 18 till the end of October of my freshman year in college. So me and Toby Crow both are the youngest kids of our high school class. But, I don't think my sister Pam had that much of an issue, but my sister Shauna moved down here. I think it would have been halfway through I think she would have been a sophomore, or, I think that transition of going from Pierre to Brandon, I think that was a tough, coming from, no different than I think it was probably a little tough for David Mickelson to go from, Brookings, where you have all your friends, and all of a sudden you're thrown down in Pierre, and now you're the governor's son and trying to form relationships when you didn't grow up there. Those are tough.
Did you 3 kids, resent is a hard word, did you 3 kids wish sometimes your dad was home more?
Yeah, I think probably almost any kid of a politician who's a very high profile and busy politician probably, I wouldn't say necessarily resent. I never really felt like my dad didn't attend something that wasn't, but I think my younger sister probably has some of those feelings, my youngest sister, but I didn't have any of that. But I also was the oldest and only boy that got to go on a lot of stuff too. If there was a speech in Huron, Huron's 100 miles away, so it's an hour and a half drive. I could go, get out of school at 3 and jump in the car and go, and we'd be back by 10, 11. So I got to go. Felt very lucky. There's probably nobody my age that knew South Dakota as well as I did, just by the sheer fact of all the people I got to meet and all the stuff I got to go to.
So that was before cell phones when your dad's career started. How did he communicate when he was taking those long drives, or did he talk to you? What did he do?
Yeah, we always, a lot of times he'd almost always take a senior staff member with him, in part to, just manage the crowd. My dad wasn't the best at remembering names, so if he saw you, he knew who you were. But if he was seeing you somewhere besides Aberdeen and you're from Aberdeen, if he was seeing you in Mitchell, he'd be like, oh my gosh, I know who that guy is. I know he's from Aberdeen, but I can't remember his name. well, the staff was good at, and I was very good at saying, hey, Dad, that's so-and-so, that's, so-and-so from Aberdeen. Well, then he was very good at, mentioning their name, but I think he always enjoyed having a staff person along, and I think they enjoyed going.
Did he get briefings and stuff while he was driving?
Yeah, for sure got briefings, so if it was an issue, let's say he was going to Mitchell to, talk to the VOTEC, he might have, the Deb Bowmans of the world, or whoever's working on that pet project, he would either, if they had phone service, he's on the phone talking to them on the way down there, like, hey, what's the issue? What's the big problem down here? What do we need to address? And yeah, he was very good at, I think he he had good staff. I think he always prided himself in the promotion of women. He had a lot of women, some of which were the first, cabinet secretaries that are females or of their particular cabinet. I think he really, and he would tell me this all the time. He said, son, smart women, he didn't even have a woman in his law school class, right? Just think about how crazy things have morphed over time. And he's like, well, smart women they were either nurses or school teachers. And he said, but as time goes on, now they're all architects, engineers, doctors. You just didn't have that many, but a lot of these women were very smart, but didn't probably have a lot of real world experience, but he would promote them. I think he kind of really, I think looking back, I think he really, appointing Judy Meyer Henry as the first Supreme Court justice. In fact, she also was, I think, cabinet secretary, 2 different positions. She was Secretary of Education, I think Secretary of Labor.
Mm-hmm. And he was a friend of Mark and Judy's. Right?
Friend of Mark and Judy's. When my dad was on Rosebud, they lived on Rosebud as well, and Mark worked in the legal aid office, and in fact took over legal aid when my dad left.
Do you think he was more sensitive to women having 2 daughters?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
It was more respect for their ability or their smart?
Yeah, their intellect and their time management skills, and yeah, I think, whoever had the best idea. Some of them they're hardworking, have great ideas. So I think the Pam Robertses, those kinds of people, the Shelley Stingleys and the Deb Bowmans. Diana Miller was very instrumental. Anything that dealt with education because of her background and experience, even though I don't even remember what party she was in, but she was, I'm sure, more liberal than my dad was regarding politics, but I don't think he cared about that kind of stuff. He enjoyed the intellectual solving problems of, hey, what does the schools need, and trying to figure out the budget, who's going to pay for it.
So he would lose his patience sometimes with people, and how did...
Well, he didn't suffer fools well. So yeah, that we can start with for sure.
That's where I was headed with this. He did. What happened? He just didn't have time for it, or what happened?
When you're busy, I think trying to have an intellectual argument, he would make comments like, you can't reason with the unreasonable. So if you're in a conversation with someone who is unreasonable, you're never going to convince them, so why are we continuing to debate? They're never going to accept my position, and I'm never going to accept theirs, so why are we continuing to talk? Makes no sense.
I remember some of those presentations he would make, especially State of the Union, but some of the things like when he had a project he was trying to sell, and those would go on for hours. Did a lot of prep work for those.
Did a lot of prep work, that's for sure.
What was his reasoning of those marathon sessions?
In those marathon sessions, people are giving him their ideas, and some of which, even though he's arguing with, trying to act like he's disagreeing with them, he's actually in his mind, he's agreeing with them, but he's pushing them to get the best idea out. And so I think his way of, it's almost like the Socratic method or whatever method you want to, he enjoyed the debate of talking about issues to come up with the best idea. So I think he enjoyed those sessions of bouncing stuff off. He usually would have if there's some person who would tell him, oh, Bill, you're so smart and that's a great idea. He would actually have less respect for that person than a person who would tell him, I just don't know about that, Governor.
Because they weren't helping him refine it.
They weren't helping him refine it. So the people I think he'd have the most respect for are the people that are arguing with him, telling him it's not going to work and it's not that good of an idea and it needs to be changed. I think he appreciated and enjoyed that debate more than anything.
Where would he be today with what's going on with Washington?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. When Trump was running for president and part of the time he was, and when he was president, I'd have a lot of people tell me, oh, your dad's a lot like Donald Trump. And I'd say to them, my dad's a lot smarter than, in my opinion, than Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean Trump hasn't been successful financially and hasn't done some good things for the economy when he was president. But the way he's, I think he'd be horrified at how he's treated military generals, people that are 4-star military, and people that are heads of, the FBI, and even our former Attorney General Barr. These people that have immense amount of respect from from both sides of the aisle and all sorts of people. To see how those people were treated, I think he'd be horrified.
So even though he was hard on people, he still had respect for the position, or for
Yeah, I would say that's true. I remember like it was yesterday when President Bush came to South Dakota, spoke, and was up at Mount Rushmore, and we were all out there in the Mickelson family. Governor Mickelson was the governor. My dad wasn't even the governor at the time, but had a relationship with the Bush family, and we're all standing around afterwards, and Senator Tim Johnson, who was a Democrat, was standing there and needed to get to the airport, but it's kind of a mess to try to get there with all the transportation and the president. And my dad walked over to a highway patrolman and said, hey, the senator needs to get to the airport. Basically, I'm just like, Dad, you're not the governor anymore. You can't order the highway patrol to give a Democrat senator. And so I made a comment about that, and he goes, son, Tim Johnson is our United States senator. Yeah, he needs to get to the airport. Let's make that happen. That's just the way he was. He had a lot of respect for Tom Daschle, even though they were different political parties. Maybe didn't always have the same ideas on how to get stuff done, but my dad, obviously we asked Tom Daschle to be, give the eulogy at my dad's funeral. My dad had a lot of respect for Tom. Just thought, even though he had a different idea on how to get stuff done, he, in his mind was like, hey, Tom was always looking out for South Dakota, wanted the best for South Dakota, and I think their offices always work really well together.
So wild and crazy, so looking back, it seems sometimes like he lived 5 years in 1 year with everything that he did. How has that affected your life as an adult now?
You mean all the things that he got accomplished for South Dakota, as I all the time I'll have people say, oh, your dad was a great governor and he did this and he did that. So, it's always kind of nice to hear that. This is a small state. We're 49th in population, so, you all the time can find people from, whatever town they're from and have some connection.
You resemble him a little bit.
Yeah, I resemble him a little bit. I used to say I was skinnier. Now I can't even necessarily probably say that, but.
So do people still come up to you?
Yeah, all the time. It's kind of the interesting phenomenon now that I'm getting older is that if you're basically about 40 years old and older, and I say my name, they right away will say, oh, were you related to Governor Janklow? Were you his brother? Were you his son? If you're 25 years old, you're asking me how to spell my name. You have no idea who I am or what our background was.
Is that good or bad?
It's okay. Life moves on. Life doesn't just sit, you have to adapt and move on.
Can you compare your dad to any other governors of South Dakota as far as just his impact?
And I guess I'm not a big historian like Marshall Damgard could tell you everything you want to know about, and he was another person who was very influential in dealing with a lot of my dad's stuff. But, I think, my dad had a lot of respect for Mike Rounds. Mike was, I think, the majority leader of the Senate, my dad's second term when he was, and I think my dad had a lot of respect for Mike, and, Mike got stuff done and was willing to take the time to learn stuff. I think my dad had Governor Dugard, had a lot of respect for him. For sure had a lot of respect for George Mickelson, and they were friends, and George had a couple bold ideas that, at the time, putting a penny on the sales tax when the economy wasn't the greatest. Looking back on it, that was a tough thing to do. The whole video lottery issue, my dad's kind of an anti-gambling person, but when the people speak and vote for it, what else are you supposed to do? You have to deal with it.
So when the people spoke, whether he liked it or not, he respected that.
Yeah, I think he respected that.
He might have tweaked it.
He might have tweaked it, but, that's true. I think, for example, I remember like it was yesterday, the drinking age was 18 in South Dakota for 3-2 beer. And I remember that he vetoed it after the legislature passed to raise the drinking age to 19. He vetoed it the very first time. And I think in his mind, his thought process is, hey, I was in the Marine Corps at 18. He actually went in at 17, but he was in the Marine Corps. And I think his thought is, hey, you can form contracts and you can buy cars and you can carry an M16 in the military. You should be able to drink a 3-2 beer. But the second time around, a year later, when it passed again to raise it to 19, he didn't veto it the second time. I think his thinking is that, hey, obviously, this is a strong, the legislature's in here pushing this and passing it 2 times. Now that's telling me that the people want it.
Your dad wasn't much of a drinker.
Wasn't much of a drinker at all. Very rarely, he'd have one beer, one cold beer, maybe water skiing every so often, or if we were at a governor's conference, he'd love to go to Benihana's. Back when Benihana's was one of the only teppanyaki Japanese steakhouses. Now they're all, you get 10 of them in these cities. But, he'd maybe have a pina colada or something. But no, I don't think and he really didn't like being in social settings where you're talking about business stuff where other people were drinking. Didn't like that at all, because people would either say things, make comments that they otherwise wouldn't normally make had they not been drinking. So if he was in a setting like that, he'd say, you've been drinking, let's talk about that tomorrow. He'd actually just cut off the conversation.
Interesting. How would he feel about legalized marijuana?
Yeah, that's a very good question. He was for sure very hard on drugs, a big prosecutor of that. But as time has gone on, I think he'd be studying the issue no different than most people have. I know, like Sanjay Gupta wrote 2 articles that ended up in Time magazine about medical marijuana. The first time he wrote that he was opposed to legalization of medical. And then a year later, he wrote an article where he changed his mind and said he was in favor of it. And, those 2 articles, which of course people can now Google and read, he's a very neurosurgeon, smart guy. And those 2 articles seem to make a lot of sense to me. And, whether is marijuana a gateway drug? Yeah, for some people it is, but to me it's more personality driven. You've had 150 million Americans have tried marijuana. To me, it's just not as big a deal, and I think he would probably slowly think that it's not that big of a deal. Alcohol seems to destroy a hell of a lot more lives than marijuana seems to have destroyed.
So was that a trait of his to study things, to observe, and then to formulate his positions? I mean, over time he could change his mind?
Well, just even taking gay rights. I'm not saying my dad was a homophobe, but I think you grew up in the Marine Corps. A lot of people in that generation didn't understand gay rights or probably were opposed to gay rights. Well, as time goes on, and my dad has friends that he have come out of the closet that he knows are gay, and I think in his mind he's like, holy buckets, I love that person. How could I not care about their rights? And so over time he got a lot softer on issues like that, and I think probably spent time studying it.
Was he religious?
My grandma was very religious, as that's been very well documented. So I would say that even though he didn't regularly go to church, he, I think, knew a lot about religion and the religions of the world. So you'd even have dinners down here where he's having dinner with Dr. Mike Ross, who's one of his best friends, who's super smart, and they'd go to dinner with another doctor down here who happened to be from Pakistan, and they'd spend all night talking about the religion of Pakistan, and are they Hindu or are they Islam, and why is it, and what are their beliefs? He spent a lot of time studying that stuff, but he knew a lot about the Bible. Growing up in my grandma's home, I think you were probably required to know a lot about it. So,
Well, let's wind up talking about your grandma.
yeah,
She was a gigantic force in his life.
yeah, gigantic force in part because he didn't have a father after the age of 11 or 12. So, I think, in fact, there was a setting one time where someone was complaining about, they didn't have they were blaming stuff on that they didn't have a role model parent, father in the mix. My dad said, well, I haven't had a father since 12, so where am I supposed to go complain about that? Somehow I figured it out. So get out of bed and go to work. That'll solve a lot of your problems. But no, yeah, my grandma had an immense, she was just a very hard-working woman and very religious, very generous. And so, I think my dad and my relatives as well, my aunts and uncles, they're all, very hardworking and very driven people.
How often did he communicate with her or see her?
Yeah, so, we always went to Flandreau for every holiday, for sure. And, I think my grandma would come to Pier, or, he'd talk to her quite a bit on the phone. My dad and my grandma and my uncle owned the nursing home Mitchell for a period of time, so I know they'd obviously have conversations about that all the time, which they sold in 1983. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, so, he had a lot of contact with her.
Was she...
So she was a nurse,
right,
who was also a nursing home administrator, and at the same time she's a nursing home administrator, she's in the kitchen cooking for the nursing home. I mean, she just she was multi-talented, like most women of that, great seamstress and could knit and, refinish antiques, whatever it is. I mean, I'm not, a lot of, probably the same role a lot of women had back in those days.
Did he ever consult her on things?
I don't know necessarily about that.
Would she have let him?
Yeah, they would, our holidays were, my dad's two brothers were also in the military, so there was a lot of conversation about military and military history and conversations about how to solve stuff, but, everyone was pretty opinionated,
Really?
including my grandma, yeah, for sure.
Including your
Yeah, including my grandma.
Is there anything else you want to tell us?
I guess the tough thing is that my dad would be 84 this September.
So young.
Yeah, it really, modern medicine has done a number. It's crazy what it's done. No male on my dad's side of the family lived past 72, and so you start wondering how long I'm going to be 60, so you're starting to think, holy buckets. But I just saw a study the other day that people that are born today, 50% chance you'll live till 100, and that's just the modern change of medications that people take and the scans that people have, that they catch stuff earlier, and it's just a different world. I suppose my dad was no different than most other dads, so that was always kind of the funny thing with people like, oh my God, that's the governor. Yeah, my dad puts his pants on in the morning, walks around the house in his underwear just like everybody else's dad. And, it was always kind of interesting. My, Pier was a place where, I'd spend nights over at my friends' houses, or they would spend nights at ours. That was just super common. You didn't have phones. Parents had no idea they kind of just assumed they weren't at home, their own house for dinner. They just assumed they were at mine. And my parents were, very, very involved in my friends' lives. They were all water skiing with us and learning to drive the boat and, that kind of thing. So it was kind of interesting.
Your dad was just your dad.
Just my dad. He was
Except
not a...
when you walked in the door of that crowded hall somewhere,
Yeah, true.
a switch flipped.
Switch, yep, for sure. He wasn't a big hunter. My dad was an expert marksman, so he was an unbelievable shot. And I just think that, whatever happened in the Marines, he just did not get a kick out of shooting a deer broadside from 200, 300 yards away. He didn't just get a kick out of it. He thought ducks and geese tasted terrible, so he's like, son, if they actually made you eat them all the time, you guys would stop shooting them because they taste like whatever. So he thought golf was dumb. He thought that was the dumbest thing in the world, that you'd hit a little white ball and walk around for 4 hours. And I think in his mind, it's probably because that was, time invested. That just wasn't a hobby for him. But he was an unbelievable mechanic. He and Frank Pachota basically remodeled our house, the two of them. So my dad, they did the sheetrock, the electrical, the plumbing. And that's back when you're reading it out of books as opposed to YouTube videos. And so he was very good at that kind of stuff. He loved taking stuff apart and putting it back together. Had a big, huge, lot of stuff in the garage, saws and drills. And I think he enjoyed spending time.
And somehow he found time to do that?
Saturday mornings, found time to do it.
Did he teach you?
He'd take stuff apart, but didn't know how to get it put back together, so it'd all sit on the garage floor forever. I really actually about half resented doing that kind of work. I mean, I did it, but, go get me a 5/8. Oh, you idiot. It's a half inch. It's not a 5, so it's felt like, and that always carried on into, can you come out to the house? I'm 35 years old, but can I come out to the house to help him in the garage for a half an hour? I'm thinking, can't you rent a kid to come out there for that? And the half hour is never a half hour. It was always 2 hours. And we could have got it done in a half hour if we did it my way, but we weren't going to do it my way. We were going to do it his way, for sure.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So he kept tinkering?
Yeah, I kept tinkering. So, my parents have since sold the farm out here, 40-acre farm. But, he loved, he had a nice 2550 John Deere tractor. And, he liked fixing fence and goofing around out at the farm all the time. Take the grandkids out there.
Oh, yeah. I bet he loved that.
Yeah. Yeah, my parents were very involved. If I didn't, Friday would come, my mom and dad would be upset if the grandkids weren't coming out for the weekend. Like, oh, what's the matter? Are you mad at us? You're not bringing the kids out this weekend. Well, no, I'd like to spend the weekend myself.
How are you like and unlike your dad?
I'm sure I have I think people tell me you have more of your mom, a lot of your mom in you. I think I get along with people pretty well. I'm not saying my dad didn't get along with people, but I think my personality is a little softer than his. I always told myself I would never work. I'd never work as hard as he did, but as you get older, it's hard not to work, right? I mean, it's like, what else are you going to do? So, from that standpoint, obviously my dad was one of the best trial lawyers and lawyers in the state for the last 50 to 75 years, that's for sure. And so I think I was really lucky that I got kind of tossed in, and the people that he, were also mentoring me, I think he just told him, hey, get my kid in the courtroom. There's no, so you can sit in the stands and watch how to ride the bull or swing the bat. There's no substitute for getting up to the plate and doing it. So get my kid in the courtroom. And I started at Woods on August 6, 1990, and my first jury trial was September 22nd. 6 weeks later, I tried my first jury trial. Mark Meyer Henry defended it, or plaintiffed it. So, I got kind of thrown right in. I was lucky as I've been involved in over 100 jury trials, which is a lot. It's more than most lawyers. I would have never had that opportunity. 5 years at Woods Fuller is like 5 years of had just unbelievable mentors, most of whom just smart people that worked hard and very good at what they did. And I was really lucky because they just gave me the file and tell me to go do it.
Never had the itch to run for anything?
Never really have had the itch to run for anything. I really haven't. I haven't even really spent much time thinking about it. I just think it's such a vast commitment and change that I don't mind being involved in my friends' campaigns or being involved in talking to them about issues, but to actually be in, the scrutiny of, I can't imagine putting myself through that. Just can't imagine it, especially in this modern age.
Mm-hmm. With social media and
With social media, constantly defending, issues of, someone says, well, didn't you do something when you were, took some, say something, or did you do something when you were 18 years old? And like, really, I'm being judged for that today? Get serious, but that's where it seems like stuff has gone these days. And, but I think my dad was very good at giving people a chance, where I don't think he prejudged people. I think he always felt like, hey, I'll give this person an opportunity, and then I'll make a decision. I think I've been very good at that myself. I kind of give people that I first meet. He used to say, son, if you went to the airport and 100 people got off the airplane and you had a yellow pad and paper, you're forming opinions about those people and you've never even met them. Oh, that guy's got long hair. He's probably a hippie weirdo. Oh, this guy's this, or that woman looks stuck. I mean, you're forming opinions based on how people look and are dressed. You've never even met, don't know anything about them. So he used to tell me all the time, you cannot judge a book by the cover. You've got, and I think he tried not to do that. Just another example of, the pardons that he would give out. That doesn't happen anymore. The governor has the power to give you a pardon. Governor Noem right now could pardon anybody for anything if she wants to with the stroke of a pen. But I think the modern trend is make you apply for an executive pardon, go through the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and if they recommend it, then I think the governor feels way more comfortable. My dad did all that on his own. He researched it on his own. I remember like it was yesterday, this guy had a Camaro and he knocks on the front door of the governor's mansion, and he was a convicted felon from Huron, but he wanted to adopt, but he couldn't adopt because he was a felon. And as opposed to write a letter to the governor, this guy literally drove over and knocked on the door. My dad sat out in the driveway and talked to this guy for literally an hour and a half. The next day, he stroked out a pardon for him. That just doesn't happen anymore. Just doesn't happen.
He did it more as a humanitarian.
I think as a humanitarian, believe people have second chances. I know he used to cut a lot of sentences. He was very, prison labor of, giving these people an opportunity to, if you had an electrical background, you were at the state fair rewiring the barns, and if you did a good job, and the warden said you did a good job, for every day you put in, you probably got a day off your sentence. I think he really believed in that. I think if he, just like they do in Israel today, I think he really, if he was president, I think he would institute everybody has to do a year, before they go to college.
Service.
Yeah, a year or two, whether it's working, picking up rocks, helping build dams. I think he feels like you live in a free country and you have no idea what a great, awesome, entitlement that is. And, you look at all the studies today, people under the age of 35 are way less religious and way less patriotic. Well,
Maybe less informed?
Less informed.
More information, but less informed.
Yeah, probably. Well, and just even law enforcement, people have way less respect for law enforcement today than they did, in part because of, how they've, I guess this is a bastardization of what the news media has done to them. Some of it they've done to themselves, but you take one incident and all of a sudden now people think all law enforcement acts like that or is bad. Of course not. That's not the case. But this younger generation has way less respect for law enforcement than all my friends and I did growing up. That's for sure.
Now you're sounding old, Russell.
Starting to sound old. Yeah, for
Are
sure.
you old?
I don't feel old. I really don't. I just had my hips redone, so I'm starting to
I guess you're officially old.
Yeah, I'm
then.
starting to feel like a new man. But
Oh, well.
yeah,
Water skiing.
I don't know if I'll be water skiing.
Kneeboarding.
Yeah.
I have one other
Sure.
question. So your dad served 4 terms.
Yep.
1 and 2, and then later 3 and 4. How did those terms, 1 and 2 differ than the 3 and 4?
Yeah, so I think the second time around, I don't know that he was thinking about, because we were practicing law at Woods Fuller. The governor's airplane going down, I think, really changed his thought process on getting back into politics. I don't think he was thinking about it at the time, but when Governor Mickelson's plane went down, which was about 30 years ago, this last April 19th, I think that changed the dynamics of him getting back involved, because overnight you had people pushing him,
I wondered.
people pushing him, you need to run, you need to get back involved. And so I think he started thinking about more and more. I think the one thing that, a change, technology had changed, but I think one thing that changed was, I think he realized there isn't like this big hue and cry for a bunch of people wanting to go to peer, right? So, when you have a new administration, it's not like you fire everybody in state government and you have a whole bunch of new people. He's like, you have literally 100 new people that come to town, and that's it. Everybody else stays the same. Government just
The deep state, Russell.
yeah, everyone stays the same. So I think that was a big change. There wasn't a lot of these people who I think he was hoping maybe would leave their private sector job and maybe come back to peer. Their lives had moved on. So, you get new young people and fresh people and go back to mentoring and teaching them. But, I think he really strived to, even the governor's hunt and some of these things, trying to, just to see how that's even grown over the years, it's insane. It started out with, the roller skating rink in Pierre. Literally had the governor's hunt in the roller skating rink in
He
Pierre.
was pretty pro-tourism, wasn't he?
Very pro-tourism, because I think he felt like that was something that we could show South Dakota off. The Black Hills are beautiful, and you have 2 million cars that drive by Sioux Falls every year to go to Yellowstone and California, and so why not take advantage of it? So and that of course was the lifeblood of a lot of stuff out in the Black Hills. So yeah, he was, I think, a big fan of that. Became friends with the Siakowski family, and was instrumental in a bunch of stuff in the Black Hills. And of course, my uncle ran Sylvan Lake for 10 years and had a campground in the hills. So he was pretty wired into the whole tourism.
I remember those snowmobiling pictures
Yeah.
with your dad.
Well, most people that never been to the Black Hills don't realize how many trails there are and how great the snowmobiling is when they have snow. It's no different than the skiing out there. You get a couple of years out of 10 that there's no snow. But
That's true.
What was the conversation between Walter Dale Miller and your dad when your dad decided to?
yeah, that's tough. Frankly, primaries are tough because you go from, you're all friends and you've all supported each other in certain races, and now all of a sudden you're running against each other. No different than the Abner race. That was a tough, emotional race. My dad felt like, hey, Jim Abner can't beat Tom Daschle, but I think I can, and the polling showed that. Even the White House was somewhat supportive of my dad running for the Senate. But, that pitted a lot of friends against each other. That was a nightmare. Because my dad actually liked Jim and had a lot of respect for him, but just figured, hey, Jim, you're not going to beat Tom, which ultimately he was right. Couldn't beat Tom Daschle. The Walter Dale Miller, that was a tough situation because, Walt's thrown into being governor. He picked Steve Kirby back, most of these politicians like to pick someone from the other side of the state to help balance out the ticket, and, which is probably smart politics. And my dad was friends with Steve Kirby, so all of a sudden you're getting back into politics against two people that have been supportive of my dad, very loyal to my dad liked them. So it made it tough. But to Walt's credit, to Governor Miller's credit, the day after the election, my dad, we went to Pierre, and my dad pretty much told his Pierre supporters, get all of Walt's supporters and let's all get in a room and we're going to kiss and make up. And, I'm sure Walt was hurting, but, he was very supportive. No different than when my dad got beat by Jim Abner. He was very supportive of Jim and went and gave speeches and worked hard to try to get him elected. Those are tough.
Governor was maybe a little better suited to your dad than senator, would you say?
I think so. And also being a governor of a state like this where you can actually, like he used to say, we're a microcosm of what you can probably try to get done in a bigger state. So we can be the experimental lab to see if it works or if it doesn't work. Well, I think that's so right. and and getting stuff through our legislative process, you can just get it through quicker. Of course, back when he first became governor, it was like 50-50. It isn't like we had this big Republican majority back in the 70s and early 80s, but it's morphed into now the Democrat Party really has almost no representation, and I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing.
Did he like being a senator?
Well, he was congressman.
Oh, congressman.
Yeah, I think he enjoyed it from this standpoint that I think the connections that he had made with people that were in the Senate or leadership in the House. I don't think he was treated like a freshman congressman. So I think he
kind of skipped that.
I think he skipped that part and was invited to meetings and sitting, being involved in stuff and that you otherwise wouldn't normally be in. No different than Kristi Noem. When she was first elected to Congress, she rose up the ranks pretty quickly and sitting in meetings with John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, and she pretty quickly rose up. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of your dad's closest confidants during this. So
Yeah.
When you think back on, your father's life, who were those closest confidants?
Well, for sure, Bush 41. My dad, of all the major national politicians, I think my dad had an immense amount of respect for Bush 41. Guy got shot down flying an Air Force plane at whatever, 17, 18, 19. That's insane to think that someone is flying a military plane at that age. And came from a family where he probably didn't necessarily have to do that, but did. And went on to be a successful businessman and a congressman and the first ambassador to China, to run the CIA, vice president, president. I mean, that's a lot of stuff for one man to do, and I think my dad just had an immense amount of respect for him. And, obviously, became friends with Bush 43. But, you just take Raleigh Samp, for example, who actually graduated from high school with my mom. Same high school graduating class. Sat next to each other because my mom's maiden name is Tom and Raleigh's an S. Raleigh's father was the band instructor in Flanders, and my mom played the clarinet. So Raleigh Samp's been a close family friend. Behind the scenes, there's nobody for about a 30-year period, at least from the Republican side, that knew more about politics and local government than Raleigh Samp. My dad spent a lot of time on the phone talking to him, and he used to joke. He'd say, "Son, Raleigh's got 10 ideas, 8 of them are terrible, but the 2 that are good, they're great." So I always give Raleigh a hard time about that. But, you have, Clyde Sockerson was, my dad's general legal counsel, but also Clyde loved politics and Republican politics. And so you had people like that my dad spent a lot of time with. In Pierre, you had Brent Wilbur and, Steve Zinner, who became a judge and a justice. Those were family friends who both worked in the AG's office for my dad, who were fabulous, smart lawyers who have wonderful, smart wives. Sandy Zinner becomes a cabinet secretary, and Lori Wilbur goes on to be a circuit court judge and the second female Supreme Court justice. And these are just, my dad spent a lot of time, with these people and talking to these people, and they're smart people that had great ideas about how to do all sorts of stuff. There's a long list I could give you, to be honest with you. Like I'd mentioned Dr. Mike Ross before. He was he and his wife Judy, I think my dad's second inaugural. They were the grand marshals for that. But Dr. Ross was an anesthesiologist, but he was just a smart, intelligent man, a vivacious reader, and loved to be involved in solving not just medical issues, but all sorts of other issues. Just a smart human being.
Did your dad ever read for fun, or did he have so much other stuff to read?
Yeah, he, in addition to the work stuff, he probably had 30 magazines that he subscribed to, everything from Popular Mechanics to you name it. And he subscribed to the Chicago Tribune, so I got delivered to the house. So, you know, he used to joke all the time, I know more about what's going on in Chicago than the people that live in Chicago. And he did. He knew all about who the mayor was and who the aldermans were and what the big issues of the day were. And he loved Chicago, that's for sure.
When South Dakota was celebrating its 100th anniversary, your dad was very instrumental in helping to move forward the building of the Cultural Heritage Center.
Yeah.
And Mickelson took over after that with the fundraising, but do you remember any?
I don't remember too much about that other than I know that, you know, our capital is super beautiful. Most people have never been there, don't realize, and I'm not saying other states aren't, but ours is beautiful, and the grounds are absolutely beautiful. And so, you know, building something like that, whether it's the state library or, you know, the Hilgers Gulch or the Cultural Heritage Center, yeah, I think those are all things that, you know, I'm sure Marshall Damgard and my mom and others, Jim Sawyer, that's a name I hadn't mentioned yet. You know, that's a, you know, person who very instrumental, my dad's press secretary and chief of staff, and Ron Williamson and Tony Mary. I mean, we're talking about super smart people that they themselves enjoyed public service and public life, but could have gone on, like Ron Williamson actually did go off into private sector and did very well, but most of these people could have done whatever they wanted, but they loved working, you know, loved public service. You don't have to have that much money to enjoy living in Pierre, though, to be honest with you. You know, besides hunting and fishing, it isn't like there's a bunch of nightlife to spend a bunch of money on. Everyone, I think, as the rivers developed, everyone wants a boat and hang out on the river. And a lot of people hunt and fish. Fishing and hunting is phenomenal. It really is.
Are you being paid by Pierre to say
No,
that?
it's just the truth. It is. It's the truth.
Yeah, people who've never, if you're visiting Pierre during the session, it's a completely different story than if you live there. That's really true.
Yeah, you know, and the older I get, I hate the cold weather. I think growing up, I didn't really pay much attention to, you know, it just didn't seem to bother me or wasn't even on my mind. But the older I get, I can't stand January and February. It's dark in the morning, dark when you get off work, and it's cold. So, but that's you know, that's a negative. But the positive is we don't have the crime rate that you have, and you can still probably in Pierre leave your keys in your car. There probably hasn't been a stolen car in Pierre in 20 years. And if they did, they stole it to drive from one side of town to the other. They didn't steal it to leave town.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
That was
parting
really
words?
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. I mean, it's, you know.
I wish we had done this with your dad.
Yeah, well, there's
Although he might have been, I don't know, he might not have, what would he have said?
You know, it's so there's a speech when he got done being governor the first time. He had just gotten beat in the primary. He, I think, was either talking to C-SPAN or somebody, but it's on the internet. It's in 1986, and it's like an hour long. It's like shocking about the stuff he was talking about then, of how true it is today. It's yeah,
Wow,
shocking.
really? I
Yeah,
gotta look it
yeah.
up.
You watch that, and it's like mind blowing about the issues he's talking about that they were facing then, and he thinks they're going to be facing now, and you know, just the issues. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm expecting California to be knocking on our door, or Arizona, for water.
Probably, yeah. And you know, and I don't know. I know that they've gotten a lot of snow now, so I don't know if it's filling up the Colorado River or not. But yeah, those
It's not going to.
are huge issues in that part of the world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Kylie,
Good
good to
stuff.
go?